On Christmas Eve, while the town below was warm and lit with celebration, a man rode alone into the cold hills on an old Harley. Jack Walker, a former soldier, now a working-class biker with nowhere to be and no one waiting. In front of him, a retired service dog named Buddy sat steady against the wind, still guarding, still working. When the bike died in the snow and the temperature kept falling, one porch light in the darkness changed everything. This is not a story about miracles. It's a story about staying when leaving would have been easier. Stay with this story. Because what happened next didn't change Jack's past, but it gave him something he hadn't felt in years. The city of Redwood Falls looked smaller in winter. Snow covered the sidewalks, the roofs, the parked cars, and even the old street signs that most people had stopped noticing years ago. Christmas lights hung across Main Street, blinking slowly in red, green, and yellow, but the cold made them feel distant rather than joyful. The wind moved steadily through the narrow roads, pushing snow into corners and against doors that had not been opened in days. It was the kind of cold that stayed with you, not sharp or dramatic, just constant and tiring. Most shops were closed early for Christmas Eve. A grocery store near the edge of town still had its lights on, and a gas station stood open with only one car at the pump. Beyond that, the road climbed toward the hills, where houses were spaced farther apart, and snow piled higher with every passing hour. The sky was gray and heavy, promising more snowfall before morning. A black Harley-Davidson, old and worn but carefully maintained, moved slowly along the outer road. The engine sound was low and steady, not loud, not rushed. The rider did not weave or speed. He rode like someone who had nowhere urgent to be and nowhere specific to go. The man riding the Harley was Jack Walker, 48 years old. He was large, broad in the shoulders, with a solid build shaped by years of physical work. His skin was pale from long winters, and his arms were marked with faded tattoos that told stories he no longer explained to people. He wore a black leather biker jacket, thick and weathered, zipped up against the cold. His gloves were worn but clean. His boots were practical, not stylish. Jack's head was shaved close, except for a small section of hair pulled back and tied low behind his head. His beard was full, thick, and touched with gray. His face looked serious, calm, and controlled. There was no anger in his expression, and no softness either. He carried himself with quiet discipline, the kind that comes from years of being responsible for more than just yourself. Jack had served overseas years earlier. He did not talk about it. When people asked, he simply said he used to be in the military. Now he worked as a mechanic and day laborer, fixing engines, replacing parts, loading trucks, and taking whatever jobs kept him paid enough to survive. He rented a small room behind an auto shop on the edge of town. It was cheap, quiet, and empty. That suited him most days. Christmas Eve was different. Jack did not like staying inside on Christmas. The silence made things louder in his head. So, he rode. Sitting firmly on the front section of the Harley, just behind the headlight, was Buddy. Buddy was a German Shepherd-type dog, closer to a Belgian Malinois in posture, lean and athletic even at rest. His coat was short and well-kept, black and tan, marked with signs of age around the muzzle. His ears were upright, alert, but relaxed. His eyes were dark, focused, and steady. He did not bark. He did not growl. He simply watched. Buddy had once been a working dog, trained for special service. Those years were behind him now, but the habits never left. He sat facing forward, body aligned with the bike, adjusting his balance naturally with every movement. He shielded Jack from the wind as much as his body could, positioning himself instinctively. His presence was calm, controlled, and protective. Jack trusted Buddy more than he trusted most people. The two of them had been together since Jack left the service. Buddy had followed him through different jobs, different rooms, and different winters. They understood each other without words. When Jack was tired, Buddy knew. When Buddy needed rest, Jack stopped. Neither demanded more than the other could give. As Jack guided the Harley up the mountain road outside Redwood Falls, snow began to fall heavier. It did not come down fast, but it came down steadily, building layer after layer. Jack slowed further, his eyes focused on the road ahead. Buddy remained still, adjusting his weight slightly when the bike leaned. A few miles outside town, the engine began to lose strength. Jack noticed immediately. He eased off the throttle and listened. The Harley coughed once, then again. Jack guided the bike toward the shoulder and brought it to a stop without panic. Snow continued to fall, landing on his jacket, Buddy's back, and the gas tank. Jack turned the key off. He sat still for a moment, breathing slowly. "It's okay," he said quietly, more to Buddy than to himself. Buddy did not move. He looked back briefly, checking Jack's face, then returned his attention to the road and the trees beyond. Jack dismounted carefully and knelt beside the engine, removing one glove to feel the cold metal. He already knew what the problem was: low fuel. He had misjudged the distance, distracted by the road and the quiet. He accepted the mistake without frustration. What concerned him was not the walk. It was Buddy. Jack removed his jacket and draped it partially over Buddy's back, securing it gently. The temperature was dropping, and the wind was growing stronger. Buddy tolerated the movement calmly, shifting slightly to stay close. Jack stood and looked around. The road was empty. The forest on either side was thick with pine trees, their branches heavy with snow. Visibility was limited, but after a moment Jack noticed something through the falling white: a light. Far ahead, off the road, there was a faint yellow glow. It did not flicker like holiday decorations. It was steady, warm, and deliberate. A house. Jack hesitated only briefly. He took Buddy's leash, clipped it gently, and began walking toward the light, guiding Buddy through the snow. The wind pushed against them, but neither resisted. They moved slowly, carefully, step by step. The house was small and old, set back from the road with a narrow path leading to the front door. A single porch light illuminated the entrance. Snow had piled along the edges, but the path had been cleared recently. Someone was living here. Someone was awake. Jack stepped onto the porch and knocked once. He did not knock loudly. The door opened after a few seconds. The woman standing there was Evelyn Brooks, 76 years old. She was thin, with straight posture and white hair pulled back neatly. She wore a thick sweater and held the door with steady hands. Her face showed age, but also care. Her eyes were alert, cautious, but not afraid. She looked first at Buddy. Buddy sat immediately, positioning himself slightly in front of Jack, calm and still. Then she looked at Jack. He removed his helmet and held it at his side. "Ma'am," he said respectfully, "my bike broke down. We're not in trouble, just cold. I was hoping we could wait out the storm." Evelyn studied him carefully. She noticed his size, his tattoos, his quiet posture. She noticed the dog's discipline and age. She noticed the way Jack stood slightly angled toward Buddy, protective without being obvious. "You don't look dangerous," she said finally. "You look tired." She stepped back and opened the door wider. "Come in," she added. "Christmas Eve is not the night to stand outside." Jack nodded once. "Thank you." He guided Buddy inside. The house was warm, clean, and simple. A small living room held a couch, a chair, and a wooden table near the window. A heater worked steadily in the corner. The smell of cocoa lingered in the air. On the table were 3 chairs. 2 mugs sat on the table. One was full. The other had clearly not been touched. Evelyn noticed Jack's glance and spoke calmly. "I make an extra one every Christmas," she said. "Habit." Jack did not ask questions. Buddy lay down near Jack's boots, facing the door. Outside, the snow continued to fall. Inside, for the first time that night, the wind was no longer the loudest thing in the room. The house settled into silence the way old homes often do, slowly and without resistance. The heater clicked on and off at regular intervals, sending a low hum through the room. Snow continued to fall outside, tapping softly against the windows and the porch railing. The storm was not violent, just steady, as if it had decided to stay the night. Jack remained standing near the door at first. He did not take off his boots right away. He was used to being temporary in other people's spaces, used to not assuming comfort was meant for him. Buddy lay down near Jack's feet, positioned so his body faced the entrance. His head rested on his front paws, eyes open, alert but calm. Evelyn Brooks moved slowly but with purpose. She closed the door, turned the lock once, and hung Jack's helmet on a hook near the wall. Her movement suggested a woman who had lived alone long enough to trust routine more than conversation. "You can sit," she said, nodding toward the chair by the table. "The floor's cold." Jack hesitated, then nodded and removed his boots carefully, placing them neatly beside the door. He sat where she indicated, his posture upright, hands resting on his knees. Buddy shifted slightly, then lay down again, close enough that Jack could feel the warmth of his body through his jeans. Evelyn returned to the small kitchen area and lifted the kettle from the stove. She poured hot cocoa into the 2 mugs already on the table, Steam rose gently into the air. The third mug remained where it was, untouched. Jack noticed again, but did not ask. She carried one mug over and set it in front of him. "Careful," she said. "It's hot." "Thank you," Jack replied. Their voices were quiet, not because they were afraid of the silence, but because they respected it. Evelyn sat across from him, wrapping her hands around her own mug. She did not drink immediately. Instead, she looked at Buddy. "He's older," she said. "You can tell by the eyes." "Yes, ma'am," Jack answered. "He's retired." "From what?" "Service," Jack said simply. Evelyn nodded. "That explains his manners." Buddy's ears flicked slightly at the sound of Jack's voice, but he did not move. He stayed alert, steady, present. Evelyn took a small sip of her cocoa. "My name's Evelyn," she said. "I suppose I should have said that first." "Jack," he replied. "And this is Buddy." Buddy did not look at her when his name was spoken. He already knew he was safe. Evelyn studied Jack more closely now. She noticed the lines on his face, not from age alone, but from endurance. His hands were large, scarred, and clean, the hands of someone who worked hard and took care of his tools. She noticed how his eyes moved occasionally toward the window, checking the weather without panic. "You don't strike me as someone who likes Christmas much," she said gently. Jack paused. He considered honesty and chose a quiet version of it. "I don't mind it," he said. "I just don't celebrate." Evelyn accepted that without pushing further. She looked toward the window herself. Outside, the snow blurred the edges of the world. "I used to," she said, "a long time ago." She lifted the untouched mug and moved it closer to the window, placing it where the porch light cast a soft glow across the table. Jack watched but said nothing. "I make that one every year," Evelyn continued. "I don't drink it. It just sits." Jack nodded once. "Habit's hard to break." "Yes," she agreed. "It keeps you company when no one else does." The room fell quiet again. Buddy shifted his position slightly, turning his body so he could see both Jack and Evelyn. His breathing was slow and even. Jack took a sip of his cocoa. It was warm and simple, not overly sweet. The heat spread through his chest, easing something he had not realized was tight. "How long you been riding that Harley?" Evelyn asked. "Most of my adult life," Jack said. "This one for about 12 years. "She sounds tired," Evelyn said, "but she keeps going." Jack allowed himself a small smile. "So, do some people." Evelyn returned the smile briefly, then looked down at her hands. They trembled slightly, not from fear, but from age and the effort of holding things steady for too long. "My son liked motorcycles," she said after a moment. "He used to stand out on this porch and listen when one went by. Said he liked the sound. Said it meant someone was going somewhere." Jack listened closely, his expression unchanged but attentive. "He was young," Evelyn continued. "Too young to understand that sometimes people ride because they don't have a place to stop." Jack felt Buddy press closer against his leg, a small, grounding weight. "I'm sorry," Jack said quietly. Evelyn nodded. "Thank you. It was a long time ago. But Christmas has a way of remembering things for you." She stood and moved to a small cabinet near the wall. From it, she took out a folded blanket and placed it gently over Buddy's back. Buddy accepted it without resistance, adjusting just enough to stay comfortable. "He can sleep there," she said. "He doesn't have to stay alert all night." Jack shook his head slightly. "He will anyway." Buddy's eyes remained open, but his breathing slowed further. Evelyn returned to her chair. "You can stay until morning," she said. "Roads won't be safe before then." "I don't want to be a burden," Jack replied. She looked at him directly. "You're not. Burdens don't take their boots off by the door." Jack looked down, unsure how to respond. He nodded once more. The clock on the wall ticked softly, marking the seconds without urgency. The storm outside continued, steady and patient. At some point, Evelyn spoke again, her voice quieter now. "I don't open the door much these days, but when I saw your dog sitting the way he did, I knew you weren't here to take anything." Jack looked at Buddy. "He doesn't let me be." "That's good," Evelyn said. "Everyone needs someone who won't let them disappear." Jack leaned back slightly in his chair, careful not to make noise. The warmth of the room and the steady presence of Buddy allowed his shoulders to lower, just a little. Outside, the porch light remained on, casting a circle of yellow against the falling snow. Inside, 3 chairs remained at the table. Only 2 were filled. For tonight, that was enough. Morning arrived quietly. There was no sudden light, no dramatic change in the weather. The snow had stopped falling sometime during the night, leaving the world outside muted and pale. The sky was still gray, but lighter than before, as if it were considering whether to clear. The wind had settled, and the trees stood still under the weight of a fresh snow. Jack woke before the heater clicked on. He sat up slowly on the couch, careful not to make noise. His body felt stiff, the familiar ache in his shoulders and lower back reminding him that he was not young anymore. For a moment, he did not remember where he was. Then he noticed the unfamiliar ceiling, the faint smell of cocoa still lingering in the air, and the quiet that did not feel empty. Buddy was already awake. The dog lay on the floor near the couch, his body positioned so that he faced both Jack and the front door. His eyes were open, alert, but calm. When Jack shifted his weight, Buddy's ears moved slightly, and his tail gave one slow thump against the floor. Jack reached down and rested his hand briefly on Buddy's neck. The fur was warm, solid, real. "Good morning," Jack whispered. Buddy did not move closer. He did not need to. He stayed where he was, doing his job without drawing attention to it. Jack stood and stretched carefully. Through the window, he could see the road beyond the house. It was completely covered in snow. Tire tracks from the night before were gone, erased by the storm. His Harley was parked near the porch, partially buried, quiet and patient. Jack exhaled slowly. He had planned to leave early. He always did. Staying too long in one place made things complicated. But the road was clearly not ready, and neither was the day. From the kitchen came the sound of movement. Evelyn Brooks was already awake. She stood at the counter, dressed in a thick cardigan over a long-sleeved shirt. Her white hair was pulled back neatly, and she moved with the careful confidence of someone who knew her space well. A kettle sat on the stove, beginning to warm. "Morning," she said without turning around. "Morning, ma'am," Jack replied. "You sleep all right?" "Yes," he answered honestly. "Thank you." She nodded. "Coffee or cocoa?" "Coffee's fine." She poured him a cup and set it on the table. Steam rose from the mug. Jack noticed that the third mug from the night before had been washed and placed back in the cabinet. The chair it belonged to remained where it was. Buddy rose when Jack moved toward the table and followed him, then stopped and sat near the doorway between the kitchen and the living room. He positioned himself where he could see both rooms, then settled again. Evelyn watched him for a moment. "He doesn't miss much," she said. "No, ma'am." She carried her own coffee to the table and sat across from Jack. For a while, neither spoke. The clock on the wall ticked steadily, louder now in the morning quiet. "The road won't be safe for hours," Evelyn said eventually. "Plow doesn't come up here until late. That's what I figured." She nodded, then took a breath. "You can stay. No rush." Jack hesitated. He did not want to take advantage of kindness, but he also did not want to pretend the situation was different than it was. "All right," he said, "just until I can get the bike moving." "That's fine," she replied. After breakfast, Jack put his boots back on and stepped outside to check the Harley. Buddy followed, sitting beside him in the snow. The cold bit sharply now that the wind had stopped, settling into the air without resistance. Jack brushed snow from the gas tank and seat. He already knew the truth. The fuel gauge was low, and the nearest station was miles away. He straightened slowly, rubbing his gloved hands together. Behind him, the door opened. Evelyn stood on the porch, holding a coat around herself. "There's a shed out back," she said. "Tools, too. Not much, but maybe enough." "Thank you," Jack replied. They walked together toward the small wooden shed. Buddy moved ahead of them, stopping occasionally to look back and make sure both were following. His paws left clean tracks in the snow. Inside the shed, the air smelled of oil and old wood. Tools hung neatly on the wall. Jack took inventory silently, his mind already working through possibilities. "I can manage," he said. "Might take time." "I've got time," Evelyn answered. Jack worked slowly, carefully. He was used to fixing things with limited resources. His movements were steady, patient. Buddy stayed nearby, watching but not interfering, occasionally stepping closer when Jack knelt or leaned under the bike. At one point, Jack noticed Evelyn standing a few feet away, holding something in her hands. It was a small box. "I found this while I was cleaning," she said. "I wasn't sure what to do with it." Jack wiped his hands on a cloth and looked up. "What is it?" She opened the box. Inside were a few folded items. Jack recognized them immediately. A child's knit hat, a scarf, a pair of small gloves. They were his, Evelyn said quietly. I keep them because I don't know why, exactly. I just do. Jack nodded. He did not rush her. He did not fill the silence. I thought maybe, she continued, since you're here, since you understand what it's like to hold on to things. Her voice trailed off. Jack stepped closer. You don't have to explain. She handed him the box. Jack held it carefully, as if it were fragile. You don't ever have to get rid of something to move forward, he said. Sometimes you just need to remember it belongs to the past, not the present. Evelyn swallowed and nodded. That's what I'm afraid of, that if I let go, there'll be nothing left. There's still you, Jack replied, and you're still here. Buddy stepped forward then, placing his head gently against Evelyn's leg. He stayed there, unmoving, offering quiet support without demand. Evelyn rested her hand on his head. He's very gentle. He knows when to be. They stood there together, the three of them, surrounded by snow and silence that did not feel empty anymore. Later, as Jack returned to the Harley, he noticed something on the porch railing, a folded blanket, neatly placed. For Buddy, Evelyn called from the doorway, in case the cold sets in again. Jack nodded. He'll appreciate it. Buddy sat beside the bike, watching Evelyn until she stepped back inside. By midday, the clouds began to thin. The road was still blocked, but the storm had clearly passed. Jack sat on the steps, Buddy at his side. He looked out at the quiet world and felt something unfamiliar settle in his chest. Not peace, but room for it. The afternoon light never fully arrived. It lingered behind the clouds, pale and distant, turning the snow a dull white instead of bright. The temperature stayed low, and even inside the house the cold pressed gently against the walls, reminding everyone that winter had not loosened its grip. Christmas Day moved forward slowly, without celebration or urgency. Jack spent the first part of the afternoon working quietly on the Harley. He did not rush. Rushing led to mistakes, and mistakes cost time and money, two things he had learned to measure carefully. Buddy stayed nearby, sometimes sitting, sometimes standing, always facing outward, ears moving slightly at every sound. Evelyn watched from the kitchen window while she prepared a simple lunch. She did not interfere or ask questions. She had learned over the years that some people needed to work in silence, and Jack was clearly one of them. When she called him inside, it was not loud. She simply opened the door and said his name once. Jack. He wiped his hands on a cloth and stepped inside. Buddy followed immediately and took his position near the doorway again. Lunch was modest: soup, bread, and a small plate of sliced apples. Evelyn set the table carefully, placing 2 bowls down. She paused briefly, then removed the third bowl from the cupboard before it touched the table. Jack noticed, but did not comment. They ate quietly. Halfway through the meal, Evelyn spoke. I don't usually have guests, she said. Not overnight. I understand, Jack replied. I can leave as soon as the road clears. She shook her head gently. That's not what I meant. Jack looked up at her, attentive but cautious. I meant, she continued, that I don't usually feel comfortable enough to let people stay. Jack nodded. Thank you for trusting me. Evelyn looked at Buddy. I trust him, she said, and he trusts you. That tells me enough. Buddy lifted his head slightly at the sound of his name, then lowered it again. After lunch, Evelyn moved to the living room and opened a small cabinet beneath the bookshelf. She knelt with some effort and pulled out a shallow wooden drawer. From it, she removed a thin stack of envelopes tied together with string. She hesitated before standing. These are letters, she said, from my son, from when he was away at school, then later when he moved out west. Jack did not move closer. He remained seated, hands resting on his knees. I don't read them often, Evelyn continued. Sometimes years go by. She sat across from Jack and placed the letters on the table between them. I was going to put them away again, she said. But since you're here, and since it's Christmas, her voice softened. I thought maybe it was time. Jack listened. He did not interrupt. She untied the string carefully, her fingers slower than they once were. She picked one letter from the top. He always wrote the same way, she said. Straightforward, no drama, just told me what he was doing, what he ate, who he met. She smiled faintly. He thought that was enough. She unfolded the letter and began to read silently. Her eyes moved steadily across the page. Jack watched her expression change. not dramatically, but subtly. Her jaw tightened, then relaxed. Her breathing slowed. After a moment, she folded the letter again. "He asked me once why I kept the porch light on every night," she said. "I told him it made the house feel less empty." Jack understood that answer. "He wrote back," Evelyn continued, "and said if he ever came home late, he'd look for that light first." She placed the letter back on the stack. "I never turned it off after that." The room remained quiet. Buddy shifted closer to Evelyn, resting his chin near her knee. She placed her hand on his head automatically, as if the movement were part of her body's memory. Jack cleared his throat softly. "You gave him something to come back to." Evelyn nodded. "I just didn't expect to be the one still waiting." Jack did not respond immediately. When he did, his voice was calm. "Waiting doesn't mean you stopped living," he said. "It means you cared." She looked at him, searching his face. "Did you have someone waiting for you?" Jack hesitated. "Yes," he said. "Once." Evelyn did not press further. She respected the boundary. Later in the afternoon, Jack returned to the Harley. He had made some progress, but knew it would not be ready until he could reach the gas station. He sat on the porch steps for a while, watching Buddy inspect the yard. The dog moved slowly, methodically, nose close to the snow, checking the perimeter as if it were a duty he had never been released from. Jack felt a familiar heaviness in his chest, not pain, responsibility. He thought about leaving as soon as he could. That was his habit. Stay long enough to be polite. Leave before attachment became expectation. Behind him, the door opened. Evelyn stepped out, wrapped in a coat, holding 2 mugs. She handed one to Jack. "Tea this time." "Thank you." She sat beside him, keeping a respectful distance. "I know you're planning to go," she said. "Men like you always do." Jack did not deny it. "But," she continued, "I wanted you to know something before you decide." He turned to face her. "This house," she said, gesturing gently, "has been quiet for a very long time. I've learned to live with that, but quiet and empty are not the same thing." Jack listened closely. "You and your dog," she said, "you didn't make this place loud. You made it feel used again." Jack looked down at his hands. "I don't want to take more than I should," he said. Evelyn smiled softly. "Sometimes staying is not taking. Sometimes it's giving someone a reason to open the door again." Buddy approached and sat directly in front of Jack, looking up at him. His posture was steady, calm, expectant. Jack rested his hand on Buddy's head. As evening approached, the sky darkened again. Christmas lights flickered on in the distance, barely visible through the trees. Evelyn stood and went inside to prepare dinner. Jack remained on the porch, thinking. For the first time in years, leaving did not feel like relief. It felt like loss. The cold returned before dawn. It was not sudden, but it was firm. The temperature dropped enough that the windows gathered frost along the edges, and the floor near the door felt colder under Jack's boots when he stood up. The sky outside remained gray, and the light that filtered through the clouds was thin and weak. Christmas Day was nearly over, but winter showed no sign of easing. Jack stood near the window and watched the road. The snowplow had not come yet. The tracks from the night before were gone again, smoothed over by wind and drifting snow. His Harley remained parked where he had left it, covered in a fresh layer of white. Buddy sat beside him, facing outward, body still and steady. His ears moved slightly as he listened to the quiet sounds of the house settling. When Jack shifted his weight, Buddy adjusted his position without being told. Jack took a slow breath. He knew what needed to be done. He turned away from the window and moved toward the chair where his jacket hung. Buddy stood immediately, alert to the change. Jack clipped the leash onto Buddy's collar, his movements practiced and gentle. "I'm going to walk down to the station," Jack said quietly. "See if I can get fuel." Buddy looked up at him, calm and ready. Evelyn Brooks stood in the doorway, watching. She had already dressed for the day, wrapped in layers, her gray hair pulled back neatly. She did not look surprised. "That's a long walk," she said, "in this cold." "Yes, ma'am." She hesitated. "You don't have to." Jack shook his head. "I do." She nodded, understanding the meaning behind the words. "At least take something with you." She handed him a small thermos and a paper bag. "Tea and bread, it's not much." "It's enough," Jack replied. He paused at the door, then turned back. "Thank you for everything." Evelyn met his eyes. "Be careful." Jack opened the door and stepped into the cold. Buddy moved ahead of him, stopping at the edge of the porch to check the surroundings before proceeding. The snow was deeper now, packed and uneven. Each step required effort. They moved slowly down the narrow road, Jack's boots leaving heavy prints behind him. The wind was light but persistent, pressing against his jacket and finding its way through small gaps. Buddy walked slightly ahead and to the side, scanning the area, occasionally looking back to make sure Jack was keeping pace. The walk took longer than Jack expected. He had underestimated the cold, not because he was careless, but because he was used to pushing through discomfort. Still, after the first mile, his legs began to feel heavy. His fingers stiffened inside his gloves. He stopped once to sip from the thermos, the warm tea spreading through his chest and giving him just enough relief to continue. Buddy waited patiently, sitting when Jack stopped, standing when Jack moved. He did not pull on the leash or rush ahead. He stayed in sync. Halfway down the road, Jack noticed a figure near the shoulder, bent slightly and unmoving. He slowed immediately. As they approached, he saw an older man standing beside a pickup truck, the hood open. The man was short, stocky, bundled in a heavy coat. His face was red from the cold, and his hands shook slightly as he fumbled with something near the engine. Jack stopped a few feet away. "You all right?" The man looked up, startled at first, then relieved. "Yeah," he said. "I think so. Truck won't start." Jack glanced at the engine, then at the road. "Battery?" "Most likely," the man replied. "Didn't expect it to get this cold." Jack nodded. "I can take a look." The man hesitated. His eyes moved briefly to Buddy, then back to Jack. "He won't bother you," Jack said calmly. "He's working." Buddy sat immediately, positioning himself between Jack and the road, facing outward. "My name's Frank Collins," the man said. "I live just down the way." Jack examined the battery connections, his movements careful, despite the stiffness in his fingers. He tightened a loose clamp and asked Frank to try the ignition again. The engine turned over slowly, then started. Frank let out a breath. "I appreciate that. I was starting to worry." "No problem," Jack replied. "Cold catches everyone eventually." Frank studied Jack for a moment. "You walking?" "Yes, sir." "That's a long way," Frank said. "You need a ride?" Jack shook his head. "I've got my dog, and I'm not in a hurry." Frank nodded. "Still, if you need help—" "Thank you," Jack said. "I'll be all right." They parted without ceremony. Jack continued down the road, Buddy rising and moving forward again. By the time they reached the gas station, Jack's legs were burning. The station was open, its lights harsh against the gray day. Inside, a young clerk looked up as the door chimed. Jack purchased a small fuel can and filled it carefully. He paid in cash, counting the bills twice to be sure. He checked his wallet afterward. Not much left. He did not dwell on it. The walk back was harder. The fuel added weight, and the cold pressed harder against his muscles. Jack stopped twice more, resting briefly. Buddy stayed close, leaning slightly against Jack's leg when he paused, offering quiet support. When they finally reached Evelyn's house, Jack felt a deep, heavy fatigue settle into his body. He set the fuel down carefully and leaned against the porch railing for a moment before opening the door. Evelyn was waiting. "You made it back," she said, relief clear in her voice. "Yes, ma'am." She took the fuel can from him. "Come inside. You're shaking." Jack did not argue. Inside, warmth returned slowly. Jack removed his jacket and sat down heavily in the chair. Buddy lay at his feet, breathing steady. Evelyn brought him soup and insisted he eat. He did, grateful for the heat and the rest. "You didn't have to do all that today," she said gently. Jack looked down at his hands. "I know, but I needed to." She studied him for a moment. "Sometimes needing help feels like failing," she said, "but it isn't." Jack did not respond immediately. "I've spent a long time doing things on my own," he said finally. "If I stop, I don't know what happens next." Evelyn nodded. "Then maybe you don't stop. Maybe you just sit for a while." Jack looked at Buddy, who had shifted closer, resting his head near Jack's knee. For the first time, Jack allowed himself to lean back in the chair fully. Outside, the light faded again. Christmas Day came to a quiet close. Jack knew he could leave the next morning, but he also knew that leaving would take more effort than staying. The next morning came with a thin layer of light and a different kind of quiet. The storm had fully passed, leaving behind a stillness that felt heavier than the snowfall itself. Snow rested untouched on fences, tree branches, and the roof of Evelyn's house. The road was no longer invisible, but it remained narrow and uneven, packed down by wind rather than cleared by machines. The air was cold, dry, and sharp enough to make breathing feel deliberate. Jack woke later than usual. It surprised him. For years, his body had been trained to wake before the day began, no matter where he was. Even after leaving the service, that habit stayed with him. But this morning, his muscles were heavy, his mind quiet. He realized he had slept through the sound of the heater turning on and off. When he opened his eyes, sunlight filtered weakly through the curtains. Buddy was awake. He lay on the floor beside the couch, body stretched but alert. When Jack moved, Buddy lifted his head immediately and watched him, tail still, eyes steady. He did not stand until Jack's feet touched the floor. Jack sat up slowly and rubbed his face. The fatigue from the day before had settled deeper than he expected. His hands were sore from the cold and from carrying the fuel can. His legs ached in a dull, familiar way, but the ache felt honest. He stood, stretched carefully, and reached down to rest his hand briefly on Buddy's shoulder. "You did good," he said quietly. Buddy accepted the contact, calm and solid. From the kitchen came the sound of movement. Evelyn Brooks was already awake, as she always was. She stood near the counter, pouring coffee into 2 mugs. She wore a thick sweater and slippers, her posture straight despite her age. "You're up," she said without turning around. "Yes, ma'am." She set a mug on the table. Road crew came through early, not plowed clean, but passable. Jack nodded. "I'll get the bike running today." Evelyn hesitated, then spoke. "You don't have to leave right away." Jack looked at her. "I know." She nodded, accepting that answer. After breakfast, Jack went outside to prepare the Harley. Buddy followed closely, sitting near the front wheel while Jack worked. The fuel from the can went into the tank, and after a few adjustments, the engine turned over. The sound was rough at first, then steadied into a familiar low rumble. Jack rested his hand on the gas tank briefly. Relief showed only slightly on his face. A vehicle slowed on the road. Jack looked up to see a dark pickup truck pulling over near the driveway. The driver stepped out carefully, boots crunching in the snow. It was Frank Collins, the older man Jack had helped the day before. Frank wore a heavy coat and a knit cap pulled low over his ears. His movements were stiff but determined. "Morning," Frank called out. "Morning," Jack replied. Frank approached, glancing at Buddy first, then at the Harley. "Figured that was your bike. Didn't take long to put 2 and 2 together." Jack nodded. "I appreciate the ride offer yesterday." Frank waved it off. "I wanted to check something else. I stopped by the gas station this morning. Clerk said you walked all the way down there yesterday." Jack did not answer immediately. "That's a long walk," Frank continued, "especially with the cold." "I had time," Jack said. Frank studied him for a moment. "You always do things the hard way?" Jack shrugged slightly. "It's the way I know." Frank exhaled through his nose. "Well, some of us noticed." Jack looked at him, confused. Plow driver mentioned a guy with a big dog walking the road. Laura Mitchell heard about it at the clinic. Small town, Frank said. People talk. Evelyn opened the door then and stepped onto the porch. "Frank," she said, surprised. "What brings you up here?" Frank tipped his head politely. "Just checking in." He turned back to Jack. "Laura asked me to tell you she's at the clinic today if you want to stop by. Not for anything medical. Just to talk." Jack felt his shoulders tense slightly. "I'm fine." "I know," Frank said calmly. "She does too." There was no pressure in Frank's voice, just information. Frank stepped back toward his truck. "Anyway, if you're sticking around a bit, you should know you're not invisible." He got into his truck and drove away, leaving fresh tracks in the snow. Jack stood still for a moment. Buddy sat beside him, watching the road until the truck disappeared, then looked up at Jack. Evelyn spoke quietly. "He's right, you know." Jack exhaled slowly. "I didn't ask for attention." "No one said you did," Evelyn replied. "Sometimes it shows up anyway." Jack went back to the Harley and shut off the engine. He removed his gloves and rubbed his hands together. Later that morning, Jack decided to walk into town. Not because he needed to, because he wanted to see what it felt like to go without running. Buddy stayed at his side, leash loose, posture relaxed but attentive. They moved through the snow-covered road at an even pace. A few cars passed slowly, some drivers nodded, one waved. Jack did not respond much. He acknowledged without engaging. Near the center of town, the clinic stood open. Lights were on inside. Jack paused on the sidewalk. Buddy stopped with him. "You don't have to come in," Jack said quietly. Buddy did not move. Jack nodded once and opened the door. Inside, the clinic was warm and smelled faintly of disinfectant and coffee. A woman looked up from behind the desk. She was in her early 30s, average height, dark hair pulled back neatly. She wore scrubs and a sweater over them. Her expression was alert but kind. "You must be Jack," she said. "I'm Laura Mitchell." Jack nodded. "Yes, ma'am." She glanced at Buddy. "And you must be Buddy." Buddy sat immediately. "He's welcome," Laura said. "We don't get many dogs with better manners than people." She led them to a small office and gestured for Jack to sit. Buddy lay down beside the chair, facing the door. "I won't keep you long," Laura said. "I just wanted to introduce myself." Jack waited. "I grew up here," she continued. "I know Evelyn, I know Frank, and I know what it looks like when someone carries everything alone." Jack shifted slightly. "I'm managing." "I believe you," Laura replied. "That doesn't mean you have to keep doing it the same way." Jack did not argue. He listened. "There's work at the garage on Pine Street," she said. "They're short-handed. I mentioned you. Frank mentioned you too." Jack frowned. "I didn't ask." "I know," Laura said. "You didn't have to." She handed him a card. "No pressure, just information." Jack took the card and stood. "Thank you." Laura smiled. "Merry Christmas, Jack." He nodded once and left. The walk back to Evelyn's house felt different. Not easier, just less heavy. When they reached the porch, Evelyn was waiting. "Everything all right?" she asked. "Yes," Jack said. "I think so." That evening, Jack sat at the table with Evelyn and Buddy nearby. The house felt warmer, not because of the heater, but because it was being used. Jack looked at Buddy, then at Evelyn. "I might stay a bit longer," he said. Evelyn smiled. "That would be fine." Outside, the porch light remained on as the sun set. This time, it did not feel like it was waiting for something lost. It felt like it was marking a place that mattered. The weather changed again by late afternoon. It was not a storm like the one before. There was no heavy snowfall or strong wind. Instead, the temperature dropped quickly, faster than expected, pulling the warmth out of the air and replacing it with a sharp, dry cold. The sky cleared just enough to let the light fade early, and the ground hardened beneath a thin layer of ice. Jack noticed it first while standing near the Harley. He had been tightening a bolt on the rear bracket when his fingers stiffened more than usual. He flexed them once, then again, and stood upright. Buddy sat nearby, watching him closely. When Jack stopped working, Buddy stood too, stepping closer. "Almost done," Jack said quietly. He had decided to stay another night. Not because the road was blocked, but because Evelyn's furnace had begun to make a sound that concerned him. It was intermittent, uneven. Jack had heard it earlier in the day and knew what it meant. The unit was old. It could fail in weather like this. Evelyn stood inside, watching through the window. She wore her coat even indoors now, a sign she did not comment on but did not hide either. Jack set his tools down and went inside. "It's getting colder," he said. "Your furnace isn't holding steady." Evelyn nodded. "It's done that before." "Yes, ma'am," Jack replied. "But not with temperatures dropping this fast." She sighed and sat at the table. "I was hoping it would last the winter." Jack removed his gloves and rubbed his hands together. "I can try to stabilize it. I can't promise more than that." "That's more than enough," Evelyn said. They moved to the utility area together. The furnace sat in a small closet near the back of the house, surrounded by old shelving and boxes that had not been touched in years. Jack knelt carefully and removed the access panel. Buddy lay down a few feet away, eyes fixed on Jack's hands. Jack worked slowly. He adjusted a valve, checked a connection, cleaned buildup where he could. The machine responded, the noise settling into a steadier rhythm, for now. He replaced the panel and stood. "It should hold through the night," he said, "but if it starts clicking again, wake me." Evelyn frowned. "You don't need to." "I want to," Jack said, firm but calm. She nodded and did not argue. Dinner that evening was quieter than the night before. Evelyn made stew and insisted Jack eat a full bowl. Buddy rested near the table, his body angled toward Jack, but his eyes moving between both of them. The clock on the wall ticked steadily. Outside, the cold deepened. After dinner, Jack stepped onto the porch to check the temperature again. The air bit sharply at his face. He exhaled and saw his breath immediately. Behind him, Buddy followed and sat at his side. "I know," Jack said softly. "We'll keep an eye on it." He returned inside and settled into the chair near the furnace room. He did not lie down. He leaned back, with his boots still on and his jacket within reach. The house grew quieter as the night progressed. Evelyn went to bed early, leaving her door open. "In case you need me," she said. "Yes, ma'am." Jack stayed awake, listening. The furnace held for several hours. Then, sometime after midnight, it changed. The sound returned, sharper this time, uneven. Jack stood immediately and moved to the utility closet. Buddy was already there, alert, watching. Jack opened the panel and adjusted the valve again. The noise lessened, then returned. He tightened a connection, careful not to force it. The furnace responded briefly, then shut down. Jack froze. The house cooled quickly without the steady hum. He replaced the panel and stood, thinking. Buddy stepped closer, his posture calm but ready. Jack went to Evelyn's door and knocked gently. "Ma'am?" She woke quickly. "What is it?" "The furnace shut off," Jack said. "I'm going to try restarting it, but it may not hold." Evelyn sat up slowly, concern clear but controlled. "What do we do?" "We conserve heat," Jack replied. "I'll block drafts. We'll use the fireplace." She nodded. "Tell me what you need." Jack moved quickly but carefully. He sealed the back door with towels, closed off unused rooms, and lit the fireplace. Buddy followed him room to room, staying close, never in the way. The temperature inside dropped, but slowly. Jack worked without complaint, his breath steady, his movements precise. The cold settled into his muscles, but he ignored it. He had been colder before. By early morning, exhaustion set in. Jack sat on the floor near the fireplace, back against the wall. Buddy lay beside him, pressed close. The dog's warmth was steady, grounding. Evelyn watched from the chair, bundled in blankets. "You should rest," she said quietly. "I will," Jack replied, just keeping an ear on things. She studied him. "You're shaking." Jack looked down at his hands. They trembled slightly. "It's nothing," he said. Buddy lifted his head and shifted closer, placing his body against Jack's side. The contact was firm and intentional. Jack leaned back and closed his eyes briefly. The room remained quiet, broken only by the crackle of the fire. At some point before dawn, Jack stood to check the furnace one last time. His movements were slower now. He felt lightheaded when he stood, the result of cold and fatigue combined. He took one step, then another. Buddy stood immediately and moved with him. Jack reached the utility room and knelt again. He adjusted the valve carefully. The furnace kicked on. Relief washed through him, brief and sharp. Then the room tilted. Jack reached for the wall, but did not fall. He lowered himself carefully to the floor instead, breathing slowly, deliberately. Buddy moved in front of him, positioning himself between Jack and the open space, blocking the draft. He sat, then leaned in, steady and warm. Evelyn appeared in the doorway moments later. "Jack? I'm all right," he said, voice calm but tired. "Just need a minute." She knelt beside him. "You pushed too hard." He did not deny it. "Let me help you," she said. Jack nodded once. They sat together until the dizziness passed. The furnace continued to run, steady now. By morning, the cold began to ease. Sunlight returned slowly, pale and weak, but present. The house held its warmth. The furnace did not falter again. Jack sat at the table, wrapped in a blanket, sipping hot tea. Buddy lay at his feet, finally relaxed enough to close his eyes for more than a moment. Evelyn watched them both. "You stayed," she said quietly, "when you didn't have to." Jack met her gaze. "I couldn't leave it unfinished." She nodded. "Some people don't know how." Jack looked down at Buddy. "He makes sure I don't." Outside, the porch light turned off for the first time since Jack arrived. Not because it wasn't needed, but because the day had come. The morning settled in slowly. The cold had not disappeared, but it had softened enough to make the air feel breathable again. The sky was pale and open, with no new snow falling. What remained lay quietly on rooftops and fences, packed and still. The road in front of Evelyn's house showed the first signs of tire tracks from earlier that day, proof that life beyond the hill was moving again. Jack woke at the table. His head rested briefly against the back of the chair, his hands folded in his lap. He straightened when he realized where he was, then relaxed again. The house was warm. The furnace hummed steadily. The fire in the fireplace had burned down to embers. Buddy lay at his feet, fully asleep. That alone told Jack everything he needed to know. Buddy did not sleep deeply unless he believed the space was secure. Jack looked down at him for a moment, then quietly stood and stretched. Evelyn Brooks was already awake, as always. She stood at the kitchen counter, slicing bread for toast. She looked rested, though age still marked her movements. She glanced over her shoulder when she heard Jack move. "Morning," she said. "Morning," Jack replied. "You slept sitting up." "I know." She placed a plate on the table. "Sit properly this time." Jack obeyed without comment. They ate together quietly. No rush, no plans spoken out loud. The kind of breakfast that did not need explanation. Afterward, Jack went outside to finish packing his tools. The Harley stood uncovered now, the snow brushed off completely. He checked the engine once more, listening carefully. It ran smoothly, ready. Buddy followed him out and sat near the front wheel, watching the road. Evelyn stepped onto the porch, pulling her coat tighter around herself. "Looks like you could leave today," she said. "Yes, ma'am." She nodded. "I thought so." There was a pause. "You don't have to," she added. Jack did not answer right away. He wiped his hands on a cloth and folded it carefully before placing it in his bag. "I won't stay forever," he said. "That's not who I am." Evelyn smiled slightly. "I wouldn't expect you to." Jack looked up at her. "But I can stay a little longer, if you want." She met his gaze, steady and clear. "I do." They stood there together for a moment, the cold air moving gently between them. Later that morning, Jack walked into town again, not because he needed fuel or supplies. This time, he walked with intention. Buddy stayed at his side, leash loose, posture relaxed but attentive. They stopped first at the garage on Pine Street. The building was small, with 2 open bays and a sign that had faded with time. Inside, the sound of tools echoed. A man stepped out from behind a workbench. He was tall, in his early 50s, wearing coveralls stained with oil and grease. "You must be Jack," the man said. "Yes, sir." "I'm Tom Hargreaves," he said, extending his hand. "Frank mentioned you. Laura, too." Jack shook his hand firmly. "I'm looking for steady work." Tom nodded. "We're looking for someone who shows up." Jack gestured slightly toward Buddy. "He comes with me." Tom glanced down at Buddy, who sat calmly at Jack's side. "That dog won't be a problem," Tom said. "He's better behaved than most of my mechanics." They talked for several minutes, about engines, about schedules, about expectations. Tom nodded at the end. "You start tomorrow, if that works." "It does," Jack said. On the way back, Jack stopped at the clinic. Laura Mitchell was at the desk, reviewing the paperwork. She looked up and smiled when she saw him. "You went to the garage," she said. "Yes, ma'am." "And?" "I start tomorrow." Laura smiled wider. "I'm glad," Jack nodded. "So am I." They exchanged a few more words, nothing heavy. Jack did not linger. By the time he returned to Evelyn's house, the afternoon light had shifted again. The house looked different now, not changed, but occupied. Evelyn stood at the table, sorting through old papers. She looked up when Jack entered. "I'll need to find a place closer to town eventually," Jack said. "But I can stay here for now. I'll help with repairs. The furnace needs a proper replacement. The roof could use work before next winter." Evelyn listened quietly. "You sound like you're planning," she said. Jack nodded. "I am." She smiled. "I haven't heard that in a while." Over the next few days, the routine settled in naturally. Jack worked at the garage during the day. He came back in the evenings and helped Evelyn with small repairs. Buddy walked the property daily, always alert, always calm. People began to stop by. Frank Collins came first, dropping off extra insulation he had in his shed. He stayed for coffee. Then he stayed longer. Laura visited one evening after work, bringing groceries and conversation. She did not pry, she did not fix, she simply stayed. The house filled with quiet sounds again. Footsteps, doors opening and closing, the kettle whistling. One afternoon, Evelyn stood by the window and watched Jack and Buddy outside. Jack was repairing a section of the fence. Buddy sat nearby, watching the road. "I used to think quiet meant empty," Evelyn said later that evening. Jack looked up from his work. "What does it mean now?" "It means peaceful," she replied. Christmas decorations stayed up longer than usual that year, not because Evelyn forgot to take them down, but because she liked the light they cast in the early evenings. Jack did not comment. Buddy slept beneath the table while they ate dinner. One evening, Evelyn placed 3 mugs on the table. Jack noticed. She followed his gaze. "One's for whoever needs it," she said, "not for someone I lost." Jack nodded. "That makes sense." Winter continued, but it no longer felt endless. On a clear morning in early January, Jack rode the Harley into town for work. Buddy sat on the bike, steady as ever. As Jack turned the engine on, he glanced back at the house one more time. The porch light was off. Not because it wasn't needed, because the door was open. Jack rode down the road slowly, the engine humming beneath him. Buddy faced forward, calm and watchful. For the first time in years, Jack did not feel like he was passing through. He felt like he had arrived somewhere that would still be there when he came back. Sometimes God's miracles are quiet. They don't erase our pain. They remind us we're not alone. A light that stays on. A door that opens. A heart that chooses to stay. If this story spoke to you, share it with someone who needs hope today. Leave a comment, subscribe to the channel, and may God bless you, protect you, and light your way, even in the darkest nights.